The psalmist is all over the place in this morning's lesson. He starts with a complaint. I waited for you. Remember that? Remember how long I waited? I waited and I waited. Last month, I overheard a mother and her adult son arguing, fighting in Target. He snapped at her to hurry up, and she replied, "Do you know how long I waited for you to be born?" It was work, but it was also waiting. I waited and I waited, to which her shocked son replied, "Mom, come on, I love you." Then they hugged each other. It was 11 o'clock in the morning. The psalmist waited and waited and waited. He was stuck in the muck. He thought he was going to die. Emily Dickinson describes the mindset beautifully, weirdly. I felt a funeral in my brain, and mourners to and fro kept treading, till it seemed that sense was breaking through. I felt a funeral in my brain. The psalmist felt a funeral in his brain, but he doesn't spend much time complaining about it. He moves from guilt trip, I waited and waited, to gratitude at the speed of whiplash. The first two verses of this psalm are off and running. God pulled me out of the mud. He turned my life around. I can't stop talking about him. I won't stop talking about him. Do you know the feeling? When I was 17 years old, I had a striped t-shirt I wore to school every day for 2 weeks in a row. I loved that shirt. I couldn't let go of it. My sisters had to stage an intervention. 3 years ago, I read a novel titled The Dark Waters. That book rocked me. I still have dreams about it sometimes. I couldn't stop talking about it. I called one of my oldest friends, and he said when he answered the phone, "Hi, Matt, you already told me about that book twice." So I know how the psalmist feels. When you love something, you have to share it. When you really love something, you can't stop talking about it. You can't stop commending the TV show Lodge 49 to your friends, or telling people who live near the ocean that swimming in Lake Michigan is a much, much better experience. You can't stop yourself from quoting Karl Barth. At least I can't, right? You know that. When you love something, you want to share it. Because when other people experience the things that thrill you, the things that thrill you grow. It's a challenge, though, to apply this to God. It's a challenge to talk about God, even when you can't stop yourself from talking about her. One of my agnostic friends once asked me, "What are the things you couldn't give up? What can't you live without?" Without thinking, I said, Jesus, the presence of God, right here in our lives. And even as the words left my mouth, I tried to reach out and grab them and pull them back in. What am I doing talking about Jesus with somebody who doesn't believe in God in a bar? For God's sake, I wanted to take each syllable and shove it back into silence. What can't you live without, Matt? Jesus. I sounded so stiff, so pious. Bart says it perfectly. As Christians, we must speak of God. We are human, however, and so we cannot speak of God. We ought to recognize both our obligation and our inability, and by that very recognition, give God the glory. It's easy to insist that a close friend listen to your desert island discs. It's hard to talk about the one who cannot be described, no matter how much you love him. But it's not hard for the psalmist. He opens his mouth and he raves about how amazing the Lord is, and about how more and more people put their trust in God whenever he speaks. Maybe it's because he's not actually talking. He's singing. I remember a church member who doubted every claim in Scripture, pushed back against every single Christian orthodoxy, There was a guarantee when I was this man's minister that on the Monday after Easter, I would receive a phone call. I can't believe you believe in the resurrection. You said it again. Come on. He had a hard time believing anything that was said in church. But when he stood up to sing hymns, this man belted them out. Christ the Lord is risen today. And there were often tears in his eyes when he sang. I asked him about this once, and he said, well, I sing things I can't bring myself to say. I sing things I can't bring myself to believe. Some version of that dynamic must have been at play here in the psalm, even though the psalmist lived in an age when belief in God was as indisputable as belief in the taste of salt, or as inarguable as the feeling of being relieved, as obvious as the sun. Still, the psalmist has to speak the truth in song. Listen to him sing. Listen to him sing. He is singing for you, and he is singing to you. Don't worry, I'm not going to sing. But listen to the song and these words. Happy are you who give yourselves over to God, turn your backs on the proud, and ignore what the world worships. Were I, O God, to tell of your wondrous deeds and thoughts, numbers and words would fail. Doing something for you, bringing something to you, being religious, acting pious, that is not what you are asking for. You've opened my ears so I can listen. Nothing and no one can compare with you. The psalmist is riding high. It's like Nina Kassane says, he feels his pores opening like fish mouths. He hears blood surging through the lanes of his veins. He can feel the light of God gliding across his cornea like the train of a wedding dress behind a bride. The psalmist is riding high. And then he crashes. Or at least, he takes a very strange turn. He stops singing and he starts talking. Imagine the choir, our wonderful chancel choir, assembled on the steps, singing something glorious and powerful. And one of our soloists steps forward, and she begins to sing her solo. Then she snaps her sheet music closed, and she stops singing, and she says, now I'm going to tell you what I really think. Now I'm going to tell you who I really am. Now I'm going to tell you what I really need. Doesn't that just make you anxious to think about it? That's the move the psalmist pulls off here, though. And here's what he says to God. I have preached you to the whole congregation. This is seconds after he is talking about how perfect God is. He spins on a dime and gets all weird and accusatory and almost threatening. I've preached you to the whole congregation. I've kept nothing back. You know that. I didn't keep the news of your ways a secret. I told it all. How steadfast you are, how faithful. I didn't hold back pieces of truth and love for myself. I told it all. I let the congregation know the whole story. Now don't hold out on me. That's a wild sentence. Don't hold out on me. Don't hold back your mercy. And then it ends in a firework. Your love and your truth are the only thing keeping me together. I once took an unmedicated schizophrenic man grocery shopping on sample day. I've mentioned this job I had before, helping take care of developmentally delayed adults. My job was to escort them on their errands, make sure they took their medication. I failed at that in this case. Sample day, that's what my client Dave called the day when Whole Foods put out little trays of treats You've been in the grocery store when this happens. Little trays of treats safeguarded by drama-prone people wearing hairnets, right? Been to Whole Foods, Costco. You might not be aware that this is a monthly holiday, but Dave did. He had it written in his calendar. Capital S, capital D, sample day. When he went back to sample his third brownie, the brownie's guardian scolded him. And he looked at Dave and he said, "No." And Dave erupted. "These brownies are so good, how can you expect me to sample one and just stop, especially when they're free? Free brownies, free the brownies. Yes." That's what he said. Yes, it's like a tap dance or a new pink dress. It is a wild feeling to shout out the word yes in the middle of an upper crust, uptight Whole Foods when you just been told no. Yes! Every little kid in that store came running. Free brownies, free the brownies. It was one of the greatest things I have ever witnessed. I have always loved unhinged people, expressive people, people who are prone to intense enthusiasms and strong feelings and swings from one extreme to another. I have always loved unhinged people. Did you hear in the announcements earlier when Sarah said we're teaching a class to little children about how to control your emotions earlier today? I heard that. I thought, oh boy, we have not done a great job of coordinating the message this morning. I think I love unhinged people because I spent my formative years in Minnesota, where self-control is more important than a good pair of wool socks even. I'm not saying that people from Minnesota are repressed, but we're well aware that refusing to show expressive emotion, it gives you a secret reason to feel superior to anyone who's so gauche as to express what they think or raise their voice in public, right? It's cold up there. You need all the warmth you can get, this warm little feeling in your heart of being better than everybody else because they're too high or too low. You just keep a nice even keel the whole time. Here's something I've only ever heard said in Minnesota. That's different. That's a wild little saying. That's different. As in, oh, you think you're special? As in, don't hurt your arm patting yourself on your back so hard. That's why I love the psalmist. The psalmist knows he's special. Look at the end of that psalm again. I sent it to Greg Taylor this week. Asked him if he could read. He said yes. I sent him the reading, and he wrote back a one-sentence response in all caps: "Don't hold out on me." It's such a funny sentence. And we can respond to it, I think, like Minnesotans. I think we can look at this and think, what a ridiculous person the psalmist must have been. What a silly man. What a silly age he lived in, where you were so close to God you could get all riled up. And then we project our ideals onto God, in light, inaccessible, unmoved, unmoving, in absolute control of all things at all times. Well, what if God isn't even in control of himself? What if God came to be with us, and the first thing he did in public was get in an argument with his mother at a wedding, and then he lost the argument, and then he got everybody at the party drunk, and then he went on to argue with demons, and he had to run from a government that wanted to kill him. And he says toward the end of the Bible, "If you are lukewarm, I will spit you out of my mouth. I like things that are hot or cold." What if all the psalmist is doing with his kind of out of control relationship with God, what if all he's doing is reflecting the power of God? Yesterday at Nancy Brandt's funeral, which was a beautiful service, one of her daughters these moving eulogies that they delivered. One of her daughters said that Nancy loved education, and she loved music, and she loved the struggle for justice. And her daughter said, she raised children who, she said, each one of us, we are ourselves. She raised us to be our own people, but we all love music, and we all love reading, and we all love the struggle for justice. Who we are is determined by the parent we all hold in common. What if the God who made the firmest foundation we will ever stand upon, the God who made the solidity of rock and steel and gravity, what if this God, our God, roils with unhinged emotion, loves us far too intensely to control himself? What if God looks at us with the same eyes that Sylvia Plath saw her children through? Listen to this poem. Listen to the joy in it. What if God looks down at us and sees and says, you're clown-like, happiest on your hands, feet to the stars and moon-skulled, gilled like a fish, a common sense thumbs down on the dodo's mode, wrapped up in yourself like a pool, trawling your dark as owls do, mute as a turnip from the 4th of July to All Fool's Day, oh high riser, my little loaf, vague as fog and looked for like mail, farther off than Australia, bent-backed Atlas, our traveled prawn, snug as a bug and at home like a sprat in a pickle jug, a creel of eels, all ripples, jumpy as a Mexican bean, right like a well-done sum, a clean slate with your own face on. Praise God. Amen.